In Affinity Publisher 1.8, Preflight checking allows you to check your document for any errors and warnings which may affect your reader's experience, whether that's a screen output or a print output of your document. So in this particular document, I just want to show you how live monitoring is in place by default. That's live pre-flight checking, which means that any errors and warnings which you generate automatically, you'll be alerted of at the time, and so you can take action. So let's take a look at a couple of commonly encountered pre-flight issues as typical examples of common errors. I'll show you a screenshot of our generated pre-flight issues at the end of this video so you can see the full support for pre-flight. So let's look at introducing overset text, linked resources, missing out of date, and bleed hazard. So first of all, let's just jump down to, say, this page 12 and 13, and I'm going to introduce some overset text into this text frame. But I'll draw your attention first down to the this little indicator bell, this currently green at the moment, which indicates that there are no pre-flight errors or warnings generated at the moment. So as I start editing, just zoom in here, and I paste some text in there, you see this text is now overflowing the text frame. It is overset, and that has generated a pre-flight warning, or rather error, and you can see it's now coloured red, so that needs to be resolved. So I can double click this to display the pre-flight panel. Now, I mentioned before that live check-in is in place, and you'll see that is enabled there. If you don't want any pre-flight check-in, you can choose never, or you can just choose to have it generate at export time. So if I double click on here, clearly it takes me back to the same location, but if I'd have jumped down to much later pages and I hadn't spotted that error, if I go back to pre-flight, I can double click the entry and it jumps me back to the error, and I can resolve it by increasing the text frame height, and you'll see the pre-flight warning is changed to green. Now let's look at linked resources being missing. So if I go to Finder and I move that image to the bin and go back to my document, you'll see that we now have a linked resources missing. So by going to Document Resource Manager, I can see that the missing document is needs to be fixed, so I need to resolve that. So in this case, I can just go back to Finder, I can just do an edit undo, and we'll find that this should resolve that problem. So that image has now come back. Now, if I edited the image, so let's just try and do that. So go to Finder. I'll just replace this image with a new one I've edited. I'll say replace. You'll find that in my pre-flight, I've got a different message, and that is linked resource has been modified. So some entries that you get in pre-flight will offer this extra fix. It's kind of like an auto fix option. So if I click that, it will just simply update the linked image and we can continue working. And there we are. It's linked and it is been edited and resolved. Okay, so let's go back to have another look at a warning pre-flight. So warnings are a less high priority as errors. So if we just jump into this page 1, you'll see that everything is fine at the moment, but if I just drag that down to just touch the page edge rather than the bleed edge, that generates a pre-flight warning. And you can see that down at the very bottom there. It says one warning, double click that, and it says bleed hazard. And this is because the graphic there or the image is just not quite touching the bleed edge. It will go away once I expand it, excuse me, to fit. And there we are, that's been resolved now. Okay, so that gives you a kind of indication about Preflight, but there's some extra things I just want to tell you about in here. And this is related to this profile option. Now, a set of rules or pre-flight warning criteria are in place all the time as governed by this default profile. If I want to edit this profile to customize the pre-flight experience, I can choose Edit Profile. And you can see I can run through all of these conditions, pre-flight conditions, and change the behavior of pre-flight in relation to these conditions. So for bleed hazard, if I'm not particularly bothered about being warned about bleed, I could disable it and then come back out. And if I just touch that image onto the page edge, you see it hasn't generated a pre-flight warning because I asked it not to consider bleed hazard as a check. Now, if I wanted to create different versions of these profiles, I can do a create preset, just call it no bleed. Pre-flight 1, no bleed, and click OK. And then if I ever want to come back and choose this, these profile pre-flight conditions, I can just select that, or I can just go back to default as before. And you can see now that bleed hazard has come back now. So I hope that helps with a little bit of understanding about how pre-flight works. There are over 20 pre-flight warnings and errors that can be generated. So I'll just show you finally the list of pre-flights that are currently available in Publisher 1.8. And we'll probably add to these, or we will add to these in due course, but that's a list of the typical pre-flight warnings and errors that you'll see. So again, red is higher priority error and yellow is just the warnings.